the Supreme Court announced that they will decide on restrictions for the abortion pill. They'll be doing that this term. This actually marks the first major case involving abortion since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year. And this whole issue is coming after the Biden administration appealed a decision by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that restricted the distribution of chemical abortion pills and was critical of the lax oversight of the Food and Drug Administration for these dangerous pills. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Erik Baptist. He's a senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the organization representing the lawsuit against the FDA for its illegal approval of chemical abortion drugs that harm women and girls. Erik, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate all your support.
Well, listen, we appreciate you and the incredible work that you and ADF do. All right, let's talk about this, Erik. This is a major deal coming up. The Supreme Court is going to be weighing in regarding this abortion drug, Mifepristone. And of course, this is coming after the Biden administration appealed the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision. If you can put yourself in the shoes of the Supreme Court, what are they going to be focusing on in this case? What are they looking at?
They're looking at two things, and this is what the FDA asked them to look at. One was what we call in the legal world standing. Do our clients, now ADF represents 4 national medical associations and 4 individual doctors. Collectively, they've been treating and caring for women and girls who have been harmed by chemical abortion drugs. Now, the FDA takes the position that our clients don't have the right to bring such a case against the agency. We disagree. 2 courts have agreed with us already, and they're asking the Supreme Court to say, no, doctors who treat victims of chemical abortion have no right to challenge an approval of a dangerous drug or even the deregulation of a dangerous drug. And that's probably going to be the focus of the other side's case. But they're also going to say that the FDA is essentially above the law and above reproach, that the FDA does not make any mistakes when it comes to drug regulation. And that's simply false. We've seen that throughout the history of the FDA, but in particular in this case, where it's so egregious what they did, where they cut corners, disregarded women's health, all in its zeal to push chemical abortion drugs across this country. So they're going to focus on the merits. Can a federal agency such as the FDA be held accountable by the courts? The answer is emphatically yes, and the Supreme Court has a long history of doing so.
Well, those are 2 major issues that you mentioned, standing and then the accountability of the FDA in both of these. Yeah, who would have standing if not these individuals who've been hurt by the drug? I mean, what would possibly be the argument on the other side?
Well, the other side says nobody has standing to challenge an unlawful action by the FDA. If anything, the drug manufacturer says only those who have their drugs approved and regulated by the FDA can sue the FDA for its actions. So in this case, the manufacturer of the abortion drug can sue the FDA over its actions, but nobody else. But they're the ones who simply profit from the FDA's approval and deregulation. So they have no motivation to challenge the FDA. That simply cannot be the case. And it is not the case, as 2 courts have already agreed with us, that because the FDA already devised a scheme where they recognize upwards of 5% of women will have to present themselves to emergency rooms and seek emergency services, that emergency room doctors are actually part of the plan when it comes to chemical abortion and this regimen that the FDA approved. So our clients are especially entitled to bring a case, say, hey, you're bringing us into the fold of this regulation and this drug approval, so we have every right to challenge it.
Wow, that's, just hearing you talk, Erik, just like amplifies the importance of this whole case to me in a whole new way. Those are extremely important issues, the precedence of which could have ramifications that are far-reaching in so many ways. Now, let me ask you about this. We all know the Biden administration has made some changes in recent years as it relates to the abortion pill, including things like allowing the drug to be taken later on during a pregnancy, and of course the mailing of the drug directly to patients. But also that this drug can be prescribed by a medical professional rather than a doctor. All of these changes seem to be extremely dangerous to me. So talk to me about this. How dangerous are these changes when we're talking about women's health?
Yeah, and this is one of the things when we brought this lawsuit, we actually hope that no matter where you fall in the abortion spectrum, you would at least agree to these common sense safeguards for this drug regimen. And for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know before I started this lawsuit about this regimen, it's a two-drug regimen. The first drug it cuts off nutrition to the unborn baby, essentially ending its life. The second drug induces labor and delivery. And what was happening in abortion facilities across this country and what they're mailing out is for women upwards of 11 weeks pregnancy, if not longer, can take this drug now in this country. And that's, again, inducing labor and delivery. In any medical context outside of abortion, you would want to involve a doctor. You would want to have a pre-screening exam to ensure that you don't have any conditions that should preclude you from taking these drugs. But what the FDA did in its zeal to push chemical abortion drugs in this country first took away the doctor. Now it's just any prescriber who's authorized by the state to write a prescription can write a prescription for this. They may not have gone to medical school even to actually give this out. That was the first thing the FDA did. The second thing they did was take away follow-up exams. So when a woman starts taking these drugs, there used to be 2 follow-up exams at day 3 and day 14 to ensure she has no complications and she's taking the drugs appropriately. The FDA removed that and absolved the abortionists. Essentially, the abortionists now can push these drugs out to the women, then push them out the door. And then who's going to have to clean up the mess and care for these women when they're harmed? It's our clients, the emergency room doctors across this country. And finally, what the Biden administration did most recently was authorize mail order abortion. Now they say you don't even have to meet with a prescriber or a doctor or any other medical professional before taking these drugs. Again, they induce labor and delivery. You would want to know if a woman has a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy, if her gestational age of her baby is a lot farther along than she estimated, because that affects directly the health of the mother. The FDA disregarded that as well and wants to push these in all 50 states. That's inherently dangerous. And if anybody wants to promote women's health, they should want these safeguards coming back. And that's what the district court did. It's what the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has done. But that's what the FDA is disputing in front of the Supreme Court today. They don't want women to have these pre-screening exams and these follow-up care visits. That's simply egregious, dangerous, and immoral, frankly.
Well, it really is. And the dangers in all of this, I mean, we all have heard of so many horrible outcomes of women taking these drugs, and there they are at home or wherever and start having all sorts of complications. And many times it can be too late if those complications are serious enough at home, and particularly if you're not under a doctor's care. So what about this whole issue when it comes to the lack of oversight? When drugs like this are sent through the mail, doctors are pretty much sidelined. The relationship between the patient and the doctor has been removed. What is this whole issue of oversight when it comes to situations like this and drugs being sent through the mail?
Well, there is no oversight. There is no care and follow-up help when it comes to this because they're allowed to mail the drugs and never speak to the woman again, to monitor her progress, to make sure she's not having a life-threatening infection or remaining fetal parts in her that could cause serious life-threatening complications. That's simply absolving them. And I think that's essentially what the problem is and why we're bringing this lawsuit is because what the FDA has done is utterly disregarded women's health to the detriment of their safety and well-being.
Well, you know, it seems evident that this administration is so committed to their sacred cow of abortion that they are willing to do anything to continue pushing it, promoting it, and advancing it, even if it means to the detriment of women's health. And so I put this out to you very honestly as one who served in Congress myself for 4 terms and now looking back into this situation. Is it fair to say that in this case, it appears at least as though they're chasing a political outcome and in so doing, totally neglecting scientific judgment when it comes to approving drugs like this?
You're absolutely correct. Since day one, when FDA received the application of this drug, even before then, the Clinton administration back in the 1990s put politics over women's health. And you've seen that with every decision where they've cut corners, abused the law to try and twisted it, try to get this drug approved, and then took actions that failed to meet a scientific threshold that even the courts have questioned these days. And I want to make sure I bring this point up because you hear this a lot, and kind of why women take this through the mail without meeting with the doctors, because the lie that's been told by the Biden administration, by the FDA and others, that this is safer than Tylenol, that is simply false. Because the FDA's own label says upwards of 5% of women will end up in the emergency room if they take chemical abortion drugs. You don't see that on the Tylenol label. 5% of people who take Tylenol do not end up in the emergency room. So that is a simply false statement, and it's misleading women into taking this dangerous drug, unsupervised, unmanaged, in their own homes, in the dorm rooms, and that's why they're presenting themselves to America's emergency rooms today.
Wow. Startling statistics there. So in what way, when you say they've abused the law, twisted the law to get this drug approved, what do you mean? I mean, give us an example of what twisting the law for the purpose of approving a drug looks like.
Well, in this context, the FDA used its fast track approval authority to get this drug into the marketplace in the year 2000. And to do that, they had to call pregnancy an illness. I think we can all agree that pregnancy is not an illness, but that's exactly what the FDA had to call Mifepristone and chemical abortion drug, or call how to justify the approval of Mifepristone. They had to call pregnancy an illness. And that was step one of their abuse of the law. They followed that up with not having science to back it up. So another thing they've done over the years is study one thing, a regimen that's never been approved, and then approve a different regimen. So they've never studied in the 23-year history of this drug the actual approved regimen. They have studies with safety protocols such as ultrasounds. They're nowhere found on the label. So they have completely, utterly disregarded science and failed to explain themselves, which is, again, what Congress authorized them to do. When they authorized the FDA to be the nation's drug keeper, Congress gave specific instructions to the FDA of how to approve and deregulate drugs in the future. And they disregarded the congressional directives. And that's why, again, we have prevailed in two courts, because the courts looked at what the FDA did and what the law required them to do. And they've seen FDA flagrantly violating that law and those regulations time and time again.
So when you look at 5% of the women who take this drug are going to end up in the emergency room, possibly with life-threatening consequences, will the court look at these negative health outcomes as they're coming to a court decision, do you think?
I think the court should take into account, because it's one thing to say the FDA violated the law, but to what injury, to what extent, to what harm does that do? And you have to look at the harm that FDA has caused to women and girls across this country over the last 2 decades. So the court's going to take that into account.
So what kind of time frame are we looking at here? What's the process? I know we have oral arguments, and then where does it go from here? What kind of overall time frame for this case are we looking at?
Well, the court has indicated to counsel of record that they intend to schedule oral argument in March of this coming year. So we're going to have an expedited briefing schedule. Things are going to move very quickly, and you can expect a decision by probably June of next year, in the middle of 2024, essentially. But things are going to move very quickly, and we look forward to telling the court exactly what the FDA has done over time to disregard women's health and in its zeal to push chemical abortion drugs.
And so what kind of outcomes, as we wrap this up, what kind of outcomes could the court potentially come up with?
Well, we hope that the court agrees with the prior 2 court decisions here in our case and restore those common sense safeguards of having a screening exam to ensure a woman has no conditions that should prevent her from taking these drugs, to have those follow-up visits again, to make sure she's cared for throughout the process, because this is not just a one-day process, and not even just a 2-week process. The FDA says it can do upwards of 30 days. You can be experiencing pain and complications at least from these drugs. So it's something that they need, that women in this country deserve, and FDA has not given women what they deserve.
Well, Erik Baptist, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today and keeping us up to speed on this, an extremely important case. We will be keeping a pulse on it, and I imagine we'll be talking to you further as this goes along. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you as well. Take care.